23-year-old Victoria Blackwood, heiress to the Blackwood Agricultural Technologies fortune, stood trembling in her mud-caked woolen dress at the center of the annual Future Farming Summit. Before a shocked audience of agribusiness executives and investors, she held up a simple wooden box containing heirloom seeds and a vial of rich, dark soil. "This is the future of sustainable agriculture," she declared, her voice steady despite her disheveled appearance. The same executives who just 1 month earlier had laughed when she couldn't differentiate between corporate monocropping and regenerative farming now sat in stunned silence. Before Victoria could continue, the conference hall doors swung open, and in strode Robert Blackwood himself, the tech billionaire father who had banished his daughter to an experimental medieval farming community until she understood the true value of agricultural innovation. Now witnessing the unexpected transformation his medieval punishment had created. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A gleaming black Maybach glided silently along the private road leading to Blackwood Estate, its polished exterior reflecting the immaculate landscaping of America's most famous agricultural technology dynasty. Inside the climate-controlled luxury of the vehicle, Victoria Blackwood scrolled through her tablet, finalizing details for Blackwood AgTech's latest acquisition of a vertical farming startup. At 23, with professionally styled chestnut hair cascading over her designer blazer, Victoria embodied the polished confidence of someone who had never questioned her place atop the agricultural technology world. As Chief Strategy Officer of Blackwood Agricultural Technologies, a company valued at $64 billion, her role had been carefully crafted by her father to groom her as his successor. "I still don't understand why I need to present at this board meeting in person," she muttered, her eyes fixed on quarterly projections. "We could have done this remotely from Aspen. The Williams family is expecting us for their charity gala this weekend." In the driver's seat, Eleanor Hayes, who had served the Blackwood family as executive assistant and confidant for over 20 years, made brief eye contact with Victoria in the rearview mirror. "Your father believes your physical presence demonstrates commitment to the company's core operations, Ms. Victoria." "My father," Victoria replied with practiced indifference, "seems increasingly obsessed with antiquated business practices." The exchange might have continued, but the Maybach had already reached the imposing modern glass structure that served as Blackwood Agricultural Technologies headquarters. The building rose from the surrounding corporate farmland, like a crystal monument to technological progress. Its solar panels and rainwater collection systems a testament to the company's public commitment to sustainability. Victoria strode through the lobby, employees nodding respectfully as she passed. The quarterly board meeting proceeded with practiced efficiency until Robert Blackwood, still commanding attention at 65, introduced an unexpected agenda item. "Our latest soil monitoring data shows concerning trends," he began, displaying graphics across the room's immersive screens. "Topsoil depletion across our demonstration farms has accelerated despite our technological interventions." Victoria frowned, scanning the data. "The new micronutrient delivery system should have addressed this. We'll accelerate the deployment of the next-gen soil sensors and automated amendments." Robert shook his head slowly. "More technology isn't always the answer, Victoria. Sometimes we need to understand the fundamental principles we're building upon." The comment hung in the air, seemingly directed specifically at her. Victoria felt a flash of irritation. "Our entire company is built on technological innovation, Dad. That's literally our value proposition." The meeting concluded with typical action items and follow-ups, but Robert asked Victoria to stay behind. When the room had cleared, He turned to his daughter with an expression she rarely saw, genuine concern mixed with disappointment. "Do you know where our wealth comes from, Victoria?" he asked. She blinked, surprised by the philosophical turn. "Agricultural technology, precision farming systems, automated crop management, the family business for 3 generations. No," Robert said quietly, "it comes from soil. Everything we build, all our technology, is worthless without understanding the living system it's designed to support." Victoria suppressed an eye roll. Her father had been increasingly philosophical lately, ever since his strange sabbatical the previous year, when he had disappeared for 3 months, returning with cryptic insights and a new passion for historical farming methods. "If you're concerned about the soil metrics, I'll have the R&D team prioritize." "That's exactly the problem," Robert interrupted. "You see this as a technological challenge to overcome rather than an ecological relationship to understand." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked thousands of acres of precisely managed cropland. "I've made a decision. You're taking a leave of absence from your role here." Victoria laughed, certain he was joking. "Right, in the middle of the Singapore expansion and the vertical farm acquisition. Very funny, Dad." "I'm serious, Victoria." His tone left no room for argument. "You've lost connection with the foundation of everything we do. Before you can lead this company, you need to understand what agriculture actually is, not just what it can be engineered to do." The amusement drained from Victoria's face. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I've arranged for you to spend 1 month at Heritage Fields." Victoria's expression shifted from confusion to horror as recognition dawned. Heritage Fields was Robert's eccentric pet project, an experimental living history farm where participants lived and worked using medieval agricultural methods. No modern technology, no conveniences, just historically accurate farming practices from the 13th century. "You can't be serious. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer, not some historical reenactor." "As of this moment, you're on sabbatical," Robert replied calmly. "You'll report to Heritage Fields tomorrow morning. 1 month without your devices, modern clothing or corporate authority. Just you, the soil and methods that sustained humanity for centuries." Victoria stood, anger rising. "This is ridiculous. I have responsibilities, commitments, all reassigned or rescheduled." Robert cut in. "This isn't a request, Victoria. It's a requirement. If you want to remain in line to lead this company, you'll complete this experience." "And if I refuse?" she challenged. Robert's expression remained impassive. "Then you'll need to find another career path. I won't leave Blackwood AgTech to someone who doesn't understand the very foundation it's built upon." The ultimatum hung between them, father and daughter, locked in a battle of wills that had been brewing for years. Victoria had always taken her position for granted, the groomed heir to an agricultural empire who viewed farming as data points and technological systems rather than living relationships. "This is insane," she finally said, her voice low with controlled fury. "I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford. I've led 3 successful acquisitions. Our stock price has increased 18% since I joined the executive team. And you want me to play medieval farmer because you've had some sort of midlife crisis about technology?" Robert didn't rise to the bait. "Eleanor will pick you. Up at 5 a.m. tomorrow. Pack nothing. Everything you need will be provided at Heritage Fields." Victoria stormed out of the boardroom, pulling her phone from her pocket to call her assistant. Before she could dial, a notification appeared. Her calendar had already been cleared for the next month, with a simple recurring entry labeled Heritage Fields Sabbatical. The reality of her father's resolve sank in as she reached her private office. Robert Blackwood had built an agricultural technology empire through unwavering determination and decisive action. If he had decided this medieval farming experiment was necessary, no amount of argument would dissuade him. Victoria sank into her ergonomic chair, staring at the wall of awards and accolades that documented her carefully managed career path. 1 month without technology, modern conveniences, or corporate authority, forced to farm like people had in the Dark Ages. It was more than an inconvenience. It was an affront to everything she believed about progress and innovation. What her father couldn't possibly understand was that Victoria had no interest in dirt under her fingernails. She was a strategist, a businesswoman who had deliberately chosen the executive path precisely to avoid the messy realities of actual farming. Her expertise lay in market analysis and technological deployment, not in planting or harvesting or whatever medieval peasants did with their primitive tools. As the afternoon light faded from her office windows, Victoria realized she had no choice. 1 month of medieval farming was the price of her inheritance, her rightful place at the head of Blackwood Agricultural Technologies. It was absurd, unnecessary, and completely unfair. But she would endure it, if only to prove to her father that she could. What she couldn't possibly anticipate was how this month would transform not just her understanding of agriculture, but her entire worldview about technology, sustainability, and the future of farming itself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn had barely broken when Eleanor's gentle knock roused Victoria from fitful sleep. The executive assistant entered with uncharacteristic formality, placing a simple linen bundle on Victoria's bed. "Your father requested you change into these before departure," Eleanor explained, her tone professional despite the obvious awkwardness of the situation. Victoria unfolded the bundle to find a plain woolen dress, rough linen undergarments, and leather shoes that bore no resemblance to anything in her carefully curated wardrobe. "This is a joke, right?" Victoria held up the coarse dress with 2 fingers as if it might contaminate her. "These look like costume shop rejects. They're historically accurate reproductions," Eleanor replied without irony. "Heritage Fields maintains period authenticity for the full immersive experience." 15 minutes later, Victoria descended the mansion's grand staircase, the woolen dress itching against her skin in places she didn't know could itch. She had deliberately left her watch, phone, and all other modern accessories behind, not out of compliance, but to prevent damage to her valuable possessions during what she still considered an absurd exercise. "My father has finally lost his mind," she muttered, as Eleanor guided her to a waiting SUV rather than the usual Maybach. 1 month of playing peasant won't change agricultural economics or technological necessity." Eleanor's expression softened slightly as they drove away from Blackwood Estate. "Your father believes deeply in this experience, Victoria. After his time at Heritage Fields last year, he returned different, perhaps more centered." Victoria stared out the window as manicured corporate landscapes gave way to less regulated countryside. Dad spent 3 decades building agricultural technology, then suddenly he's obsessed with medieval farming methods. That's not being centered, that's having a midlife crisis. Eleanor didn't argue, but her silence carried meaning. Victoria chose to ignore. Instead, Victoria mentally calculated the business implications of her month-long absence. The Singapore expansion could proceed without her direct involvement. The vertical farming acquisition was nearly complete. Perhaps this forced sabbatical wouldn't damage her career trajectory as much as she initially feared. After almost 2 hours of driving, they turned onto an unmarked dirt road that wound through dense forest. "Heritage Fields is intentionally isolated," Eleanor explained as the SUV bounced over the uneven surface. "No power lines, no cell towers, no modern infrastructure within 5 miles in any direction." The road opened suddenly into a clearing, revealing what appeared to be a meticulously recreated medieval village. timber-framed buildings with thatched roofs clustered around a central green. Fields of various crops extended beyond the structures, where people in period clothing worked with hand tools. Livestock wandered in fenced areas, and smoke rose from stone chimneys. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't the sanitized historical display she had expected. This was a fully functioning agricultural community, operating as if the last 8 centuries of technological progress had never happened. As the SUV stopped at the edge of the village, a woman approached. Dr. Margaret Sullivan was in her 50s, with practical cropped grey hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of her time outdoors. She wore simple linen and wool clothing, similar to what Victoria now reluctantly sported. "Welcome to Heritage Fields," Dr. Sullivan greeted them with professional courtesy. "We've been expecting you, Ms. Blackwood." Eleanor helped retrieve a simple wooden chest from the SUV, Victoria's only permitted luggage, apparently packed by Heritage Field staff with period-appropriate essentials. "Your father explained the parameters of your stay," Dr. Sullivan continued. "1 month living and working as part of our 13th century agricultural community. No modern technologies, no special treatment, full participation in all daily activities." Victoria kept her expression neutral despite her internal rebellion. "And what exactly prevents me from walking out of this Renaissance fair the moment Eleanor drives away?" Dr. Sullivan smiled slightly. "Nothing physically prevents you. Heritage Fields isn't a prison. However, your father was quite clear about the consequences of non-completion regarding your future at Blackwood Agricultural Technologies." The simple statement effectively closed Victoria's escape hatch. Her entire professional identity was built around her position at the family company. Without it, she would be just another trust fund kid with an impressive but ultimately meaningless resume. After brief farewells to Eleanor, who promised to return in exactly 1 month, Victoria found herself following Dr. Sullivan into the village. Every step on the earthen paths reinforced the growing reality that this experience would be far more immersive than she had anticipated. Heritage Fields operates as a living historical research site, Dr. Sullivan explained as they walked. "We maintain authentic agricultural methods from the High Middle Ages, approximately 1250 to 1350 CE, to understand the practical wisdom and sustainability principles that supported human civilization before industrial agriculture." They passed, people grinding grain with hand mills, others spinning wool, and a blacksmith working at a forge. Everyone nodded respectfully to Dr. Sullivan while eyeing Victoria with undisguised curiosity. "Your accommodations," Dr. Sullivan announced, stopping before a small timber-framed structure with a thatched roof. The accommodations consisted of a single room containing a straw-filled mattress on a simple wooden frame, a 3-legged stool, a small table, and a wooden chest. A stone fireplace occupied one wall, currently cold and empty. The only light came from the open door and a small window covered with oiled parchment rather than glass. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway. "This can't be serious. Where's the bathroom? The lighting? Is there at least running water?" The communal outhouse is behind the central hall. Water comes from the well in the village center. Lighting is provided by rushlights and candles, which you'll learn to make during your stay, Dr. Sullivan replied matter-of-factly. "You'll find a chamber pot under your bed for nighttime necessities." Victoria felt lightheaded. "This is barbaric. My father can't possibly expect—" "Your father lived in this very room during his stay," Dr. Sullivan interrupted. "He completed the full program without complaint." The revelation momentarily silenced Victoria. Robert Blackwood, who owned residences on 3 continents and travelled exclusively by private jet, had voluntarily lived in this primitive hut. "You'll have 1 hour to settle in," Dr. Sullivan continued, seemingly unmoved by Victoria's distress. Then you'll report to Jason Miller in the Northfield for your first work assignment. Communal meals are taken in the central hall at dawn, midday, and dusk. All residents contribute to food preparation and cleanup on rotating schedules. With that, Dr. Sullivan departed, leaving Victoria alone in the tiny space that would be her home for the next month. She sat heavily on the bed, the straw mattress crackling beneath her weight, and fought back a wave of panic. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. No electricity, no running water, no internet, no coffee, shops or food delivery or car service. Just primitive tools, physical labor, and living conditions that most of modern America would consider uninhabitable. Victoria ran her fingers over the rough woolen dress she now wore. Her designer wardrobe, carefully selected to project corporate authority and sophisticated taste, had been replaced by fabric that scratched her skin with every movement. Her professionally styled hair would soon be without specialized products. Her manicured hands would inevitably be ruined by manual labor. When the church bell rang the hour, Victoria reluctantly left her sparse accommodations and made her way toward the Northfield. Each step in the ill-fitting leather shoes reinforced her resentment toward her father's arbitrary punishment. She was a Stanford graduate with an MBA, being forced to play medieval farmer because Robert Blackwood had apparently romanticized pre-industrial agrarian life during his bizarre sabbatical. The Northfield came into view, a sizable plot where several people worked with hand tools Victoria couldn't identify. A muscular man in his 30s noticed her approach and set down what appeared to be a primitive hoe. "You must be Victoria," he said, wiping his hands on his woolen trousers before extending one in greeting. "Jason Miller, I'll be supervising your field work." Victoria reluctantly shook his calloused hand, noting the stark contrast to the manicured executives she typically interacted with. "Let's be clear about something. I'm here under duress, and I have no interest in becoming a farmer, medieval or otherwise." Jason's expression remained neutral, neither offended nor particularly sympathetic. "Noted. Most people start with that attitude. Now, let's see if you can tell me what we're growing in this field." Victoria glanced at the plants with complete indifference. "Something green and agricultural, obviously." "Peas," Jason said patiently, "a medieval staple crop. Today, you'll be learning how to use a digging stick to create furrows for the next planting section." He handed her a long wooden implement that looked like nothing more than a glorified stick with a slightly pointed end. Victoria stared at it with undisguised contempt. "This is your advanced technology. A pointed stick? This," Jason replied, his patience clearly practiced, "is the beginning of your education. Every technological advancement in human history began with understanding the basic relationship between human effort and natural systems." As he demonstrated the proper technique for creating straight furrows in the soil, Victoria's mind wandered to the irony of her situation. Blackwood Agricultural Technologies produced satellite-guided autonomous tractors that could plant thousands of acres with precision GPS mapping, and here she was, jabbing at dirt with a stick like a prehistoric farmer. Victoria's first day at Heritage Fields proved more physically demanding than any premium fitness class she'd ever taken. After 2 hours of creating furrows with the digging stick, a task she performed with obvious incompetence, her manicured hands had developed their first blisters, and muscles she didn't know existed screamed in protest. "We're taking a break," Jason announced, seemingly oblivious to Victoria's suffering. "Time for water and a lesson on medieval field rotation systems." They moved to the shade of a gnarled oak tree, where Jason poured water from a ceramic jug into wooden cups. Victoria almost gagged at her first sip. The water was room temperature and had a distinct mineral taste, nothing like the filtered water she was accustomed to. "Medieval farmers understood soil health better than we give them credit for," Jason explained, pointing to different sections of the surrounding fields. They developed 3-field rotation systems to maintain soil fertility without chemical fertilizers. One field grows grains, one grows legumes like peas or beans, and one lies fallow to recover nutrients naturally. Victoria feigned interest while calculating how many hours remained in this miserable day. Fascinating. I'm sure this information will be invaluable when I return to managing satellite-controlled precision agriculture systems. Jason seemed immune to her sarcasm. You'd be surprised how many principles of regenerative agriculture are rediscoveries of medieval farming wisdom. Your father certainly was. The mention of Robert Blackwood momentarily pierced Victoria's defensive wall. What exactly happened to my father here? He used to worship technological efficiency above everything else. That's his story to tell, Jason replied. But most people who come through heritage fields discover something about themselves they didn't expect. The physical work has a way of clearing mental barriers. The afternoon continued with Victoria's introduction to weeding, a tedious process of removing unwanted plants from between crop rows using only her hands and a small wooden tool. By sunset, when the village bell rang to signal the end of the workday, Victoria was physically exhausted in ways her boutique exercise classes had never prepared her for. The communal dinner in the central hall introduced a new set of cultural shocks. Long wooden tables filled with people in medieval clothing, eating stew from wooden bowls with wooden spoons. No phones, no conversation about stock prices or corporate acquisitions, just discussion of crop conditions, weather patterns, and community projects. Victoria sat awkwardly at the end of a table, painfully aware of her outsider status. A young woman with auburn hair pulled into a practical braid slid onto the bench beside her. First days are always the worst, she offered with a sympathetic smile. I'm Sarah Walker, Medicinal Herb Garden. Victoria Blackwood, she replied automatically, then realized her corporate title meant nothing here. Apparently I'm on furrow-digging duty. Everyone starts with basic field work, Sarah explained, breaking a piece of dense brown bread and offering half to Victoria. Skills assessment. They'll move you to different areas once they see where your strengths lie. Victoria almost laughed. Her strengths included corporate strategy, financial analysis, and navigating shareholder expectations, not medieval farming techniques. I doubt I have any relevant strengths in this environment. You'd be surprised, Sarah countered. Heritage fields isn't just about farming. It's about understanding systems thinking without technological intermediaries, direct cause and effect. Victoria remained skeptical but found herself momentarily engaged by Sarah's evident intelligence. Unlike the historical reenactment enthusiasts Victoria had expected, Sarah spoke with the clarity and precision of someone with significant education. "What's your story?" Victoria asked. "You don't seem like someone who'd choose to live without indoor plumbing voluntarily." Sarah laughed. "PhD in environmental systems from Cornell. I came for a 2-week research project 3 years ago and never really left. There's something compelling about working directly with natural systems instead of modeling them on computers." Before Victoria could respond, Dr. Sullivan appeared at the head of the hall calling for attention. Daily announcements followed. Weather predictions, work rotations, community needs, all delivered without PowerPoint slides or data visualization. Just practical information relevant to their shared agricultural work. When dinner concluded, Victoria discovered yet another medieval reality: no dishwashers. Every resident washed their own eating utensils in communal water basins, a process she performed with obvious disgust. The true challenge came after dark. Her small hut, illuminated only by a single rusher, a reed dipped in animal fat, created more shadows than light. The straw mattress crackled with every movement, and unfamiliar night sounds filtered through the thatched roof. Without her phone's comforting glow or the white noise of her home's climate control system, Victoria found herself uncomfortably present with her own thoughts. Sleep eventually claimed her, but morning arrived with cruel efficiency, announced by a bell at first light. Victoria emerged from her hut disheveled and disoriented, having slept poorly in the unfamiliar environment. The communal breakfast of porridge and dried fruit offered little comfort to someone accustomed to artisanal coffee and avocado toast. Day 2 brought new indignities. Jason assigned her to the compost heap, a massive pile of decomposing plant matter, food scraps, and animal manure that needed turning with a wooden fork. The smell alone nearly made Victoria retch. The compost is the heart of medieval agriculture, Jason explained, seemingly untroubled by the overwhelming stench. Without chemical fertilizers, building healthy soil meant understanding decomposition as a transformation process, not waste. Victoria held the wooden fork awkwardly, her blistered hands protesting. "This is disgusting." "This," Jason corrected, "is the foundation of all agriculture, medieval or modern. Without healthy soil microbiology, nothing grows properly. Your father's company sells sophisticated soil amendments, but they're attempting to recreate what this process does naturally." Victoria reluctantly began turning the pile, each forkful revealing writhing worms and beetles that made her skin crawl. "I handle strategy, not soil science. That's exactly the problem," Jason replied, his typical patience showing its first signs of wear. "How can you create agricultural technology strategy without understanding what you're trying to improve?" The question struck uncomfortably close to a criticism her father had leveled more than once. Victoria had always dismissed it as old-school thinking from someone who had started in the fields before building his technological empire. Now, elbow-deep in decomposing matter, the gap in her practical knowledge seemed suddenly relevant. By late afternoon, Victoria's body had reached its breaking point. Unused to sustained physical labor, her muscles trembled with exhaustion, and her once manicured hands were now grimy with dirt that seemed impossible to fully remove with just water and lye soap. When no one was watching, Victoria slipped away from the compost pile and made her way back to her hut, desperate for a moment of privacy and rest. Inside, she collapsed onto the straw mattress, fighting back tears of frustration and physical discomfort. A soft knock at her door startled her. Dr. Sullivan entered without waiting for permission, carrying a small ceramic jar. "For your hands," she said simply, offering the container. "Calendula salve, medieval remedy for blisters and skin irritation." Victoria accepted the jar awkwardly. "I don't think I can do this. A month of this primitive existence will break me physically before it teaches me whatever lesson my father thinks I need." Dr. Sullivan sat on the room's only stool, her expression neither judgmental nor particularly sympathetic. "Your father struggled similarly at first. Most do. The physical adjustment is merely the first barrier." "I'm not built for manual labor," Victoria insisted. "I was educated for intellectual work, strategic thinking." "Interesting assumption," Dr. Sullivan observed, "that physical and intellectual work are somehow separate domains. Medieval farmers didn't have that luxury of separation. Their survival depended on integrating observation, planning, and physical implementation." She gestured toward the window, where the village's activities continued. "Everyone here holds advanced degrees, PhDs in agricultural science, environmental systems, anthropology, engineering. They choose this experience precisely because it reintegrates thinking and doing in ways modern specialization has severed." Victoria absorbed this information with surprise. She had assumed Heritage Fields was populated by historical enthusiasts or back-to-the-land eccentrics, not academics and scientists. Dr. Sullivan stood to leave. "Rest tonight. Your body needs to adjust. But tomorrow, I suggest you start asking different questions. not how to endure this experience, but what it might reveal that your education and privilege have obscured. Left alone again, Victoria applied the calendula salve to her blistered hands, the herbal scent filling her small hut. The cooling sensation provided immediate relief, a small mercy in what had been 2 days of unrelenting physical and cultural shock. As darkness fell outside, Victoria found herself contemplating Dr. Sullivan's parting words. What had her education and privilege obscured? The thought was uncomfortable, challenging her fundamental assumptions about progress, efficiency, and her own place in the agricultural technology ecosystem her family had helped create. By the end of her first week at Heritage Fields, Victoria had established a grudging routine. Her body, though still protesting, had begun adapting to the physical demands of medieval agricultural work. The blisters on her hands hardened into the beginnings of calluses, and muscles she never knew existed stopped screaming quite so loudly. Each morning, more surprising was her growing ability to function without modern conveniences. Cold water face washing, outdoor toilets, and meals without refrigeration had shifted from horrifying to merely inconvenient. The rhythm of life dictated by sunlight rather than digital notifications created a strange, reluctant anchor to her days. On her 8th morning, Victoria arrived at the North Field to find Jason waiting with an elderly man she hadn't met before. "Morning," Jason greeted her with the casual friendliness that had replaced his initial professional distance. "This is Thomas Reynolds, our seed master. You're moving to seed work today." Thomas nodded in greeting, his weathered face creased. With decades of sun exposure, unlike most Heritage Fields residents Victoria had met, Thomas had the authentic appearance of someone who had spent his entire life working with the land. "Dr. Sullivan mentioned you have a background in agricultural genetics," Thomas said, his voice carrying the gentle cadence of someone accustomed to patient explanation. "Thought you might find seed selection interesting." Victoria felt a flicker of genuine curiosity for the first time since arriving. Her graduate work had indeed included agricultural genetics, though primarily focused on CRISPR technology and lab-based gene editing rather than traditional breeding methods. Thomas led her to a small, timber-framed building near the central hall. Inside, wooden shelves lined the walls, holding hundreds of carefully labeled clay pots and fabric pouches. "Medieval seed library," Thomas explained, gesturing to the collection. Before modern genetic modification, farmers practiced selective breeding by saving seeds from plants with desirable traits: drought resistance, pest resistance, yield, flavor. Victoria examined the nearest shelf, noting the meticulous organization. System, each container labeled with plant type, characteristics, and year harvested. "Every seed tells a story of adaptation," Thomas continued, selecting a fabric pouch and emptying a handful of wheat seeds into his palm. "These are descended from wheat grown on this land for over 30 generations of careful selection. They contain genetic adaptations to local soil conditions, climate patterns, and pest pressures that no laboratory could engineer from scratch." Victoria found herself genuinely engaged, despite her initial resistance. Her corporate work at Blackwood AgTech had focused on technological solutions that bypassed traditional breeding, gene editing for herbicide resistance, genetic modifications for standardized growth patterns, and technological interventions. To overcome environmental limitations, the medieval approach seems inefficient, she observed, falling back on familiar corporate terminology. Modern genetic engineering can achieve in 1 generation what might take decades through selective breeding. Thomas nodded, unsurprised by her perspective. Efficiency isn't the only measure of success. These seeds, he placed the wheat back in its pouch with reverent care, don't just carry genetic information, they carry intergenerational wisdom and relationship to place. The morning passed, with Victoria helping Thomas catalogue newly harvested seeds, a process that involved careful sorting, cleaning and storage in appropriate containers. Unlike the physically demanding fieldwork, seed management required precision, attention to detail and systematic thinking, skills that aligned better with Victoria's strengths. "Your father spent considerable time here during his stay," Thomas remarked as they worked. "At first, he saw only primitive techniques to be improved through technology. Eventually, he began asking different questions." "What kind of questions?" Victoria asked despite herself. "Whether some problems in modern agriculture stem from severing the direct relationship between farmer and seed. Whether technological innovation should enhance traditional wisdom rather than replace it." Victoria considered this as she sorted pea seeds by size and color. Her entire education and professional life had been predicated on technological solutions, supplanting outdated practices. The possibility that value existed in these ancient methods challenged her fundamental assumptions. At midday, instead of joining the communal lunch, Thomas invited Victoria to the edge of the forest, where several beehives stood in a small clearing. "Medieval beekeeping," he explained, carefully opening a woven straw hive called a skep, critical for crop pollination and honey production. Another system of relationship rather than extraction. As Thomas demonstrated how medieval beekeepers worked with their hives, using smoke to calm the bees, harvesting honey while preserving the colony, Victoria found herself drawing unexpected connections to sustainability challenges in modern agriculture. Modern commercial beekeeping trucks hives thousands of miles to pollinate monocrops, she observed. It's efficient for production, but creates disease vectors and stress on the colonies. Thomas glanced at her with approval. "You're beginning to see the trade-offs. Medieval agriculture wasn't perfect, but it operated within ecological boundaries by necessity. People understood their survival depended on maintaining relationships with natural systems, not dominating them." That afternoon, working alone in the seed library organizing the extensive collection, Victoria experienced an unexpected moment of peace. The rhythmic process of sorting, labeling, and storing created a meditative state unlike anything she'd known in her technology-saturated corporate life. She was so absorbed in the work that she didn't notice Sarah until the other woman spoke. "From the doorway, you've found your place," Sarah observed with a smile. "Everyone does eventually. For some, it's the fields, others the kitchen gardens or animal husbandry. You're a seed person." Victoria looked up, surprised to realize the sun was already low in the sky. "The organization makes sense to me. Cataloging genetic diversity, tracking adaptive traits, it's like a living database." Sarah pulled up a stool, watching Victoria work. "That's what fascinates me about this place. Medieval farmers were creating sophisticated systems, thinking without computers or data visualization tools. They observed, tested, adapted, and passed knowledge through generations. But with significant limitations, Victoria countered, unable to entirely abandon her technological perspective. Climate variability, pests, disease, all challenges modern agricultural technology addresses systematically. True, Sarah acknowledged, but with unintended consequences: soil degradation, biodiversity loss, pollinator decline, water contamination. The medieval approach had different trade-offs, but it preserved the fundamental relationships between agriculture and natural systems. As they walked together to the evening meal, Victoria found herself engaged in the most stimulating intellectual conversation she'd had since arriving at Heritage Fields. Sarah's environmental systems background complemented Victoria's technological expertise, creating a dialogue that bridged perspectives rather than dismissing either approach. The communal dinner that evening felt different. Rather than an ordeal to be endured, Victoria found herself listening to discussions about crop rotations, weather patterns, and soil conditions with newfound interest. These weren't merely historical reenactors or Luddites rejecting progress. They were educated scientists and researchers exploring alternative approaches to fundamental systems. After dinner, Thomas approached Victoria with a small fabric pouch. "Tomorrow we're planting the winter wheat field. I'd like you to handle the seed blessing." "The what?" Victoria asked, confused by the unfamiliar term. "Medieval farmers performed rituals before planting to acknowledge their relationship with the land," Thomas explained. "Not just superstition, but a practice of intentionality and relationship. The seed blessing reminds us that we're participants in natural systems, not just extractors from them." Victoria accepted the pouch awkwardly. "I'm not exactly qualified for agricultural rituals." "No one is, initially," Thomas replied. "That's rather the point. It's a practice of humility in the face of natural complexity we don't fully control." Later, that evening, alone in her hut, Victoria examined the contents of the pouch, a mixture of wheat seeds representing varieties developed over centuries of careful selection. In her corporate role, she had handled agricultural investment decisions involving millions of dollars with confident authority. Somehow, this small pouch of seeds felt weightier with responsibility. She thought about her father's transformation. After his time at Heritage Fields, Robert Blackwood had built an agricultural technology empire on the premise of controlling and optimizing natural systems through technological intervention. What had he discovered here that changed his perspective so fundamentally? As Victoria prepared for sleep, laying on the straw mattress that no longer felt quite so foreign, she realized she had gone the entire day without thinking about stock prices, corporate acquisitions, or luxury conveniences. Instead, her mind was filled with questions about seed genetics, adaptation, and the relationship between traditional knowledge and modern innovation. Dr. Sullivan's words from days earlier echoed in her thoughts. Not how to endure this experience, but what it might reveal that her education and privilege had obscured. For the first time since arriving at Heritage Fields, Victoria fell asleep wondering what tomorrow might teach her, rather than how many days remained in her sentence. Dawn broke with unusual clarity on Victoria's 9th day at Heritage Fields. The entire community gathered at the winter wheat field before sunrise, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Victoria stood awkwardly among them, the pouch of blessing seeds clutched in her hand, uncertainty evident in her posture. Dr. Sullivan addressed the assembled group as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern hills. "The winter wheat planting connects us to countless generations who understood that agriculture is not merely production, but participation in cycles larger than ourselves." Victoria scanned the gathered faces, Jason with his practical confidence, Sarah offering an encouraging smile, Thomas regarding the field with reverent appreciation, and dozens of others she'd come to recognize during her stay. Despite her continued skepticism, she felt an unexpected connection to this temporary community. Thomas stepped forward, gesturing for Victoria to join him. "The seed blessing is performed by the newest community member," he explained to the group, reminding us that agricultural knowledge must be continuously renewed through fresh perspective. Victoria froze, suddenly aware that everyone was watching her. In corporate boardrooms, she commanded attention with practiced authority. Here, standing at the edge of a field in woolen medieval clothing, she felt stripped of her familiar power. "I don't know what to do," she admitted quietly to Thomas. "There's no correct ritual," he reassured her. "Medieval traditions varied by region and community. The purpose is intentionality, acknowledging our relationship with what we're about to plant." Victoria took a deep breath, steeling herself against the vulnerability of performing something without preparation or expertise. She stepped toward the field, opened the seed pouch, and tried to find words that didn't feel completely artificial. "These seeds," she began hesitantly, "carry generations of adaptation and resilience." The scientific accuracy of this statement gave her confidence to continue. "They contain genetic memory of this specific place, its soil composition, its rainfall patterns, its seasonal rhythms." She removed a handful of wheat seeds, letting them rest in her palm. Modern agriculture seeks control through uniformity and technological intervention. These seeds represent a different approach: diversity, adaptation, and relationship. Victoria felt a subtle shift as she spoke, her analytical mind making connections between medieval practices and contemporary challenges in agricultural sustainability. "As we plant today, we're participating in cycles that preceded us and will continue after we're gone." She scattered the handful of seeds at the field's edge, a gesture that felt both ancient and immediate. The gathered community members moved forward, collecting sowing baskets and beginning the methodical process of planting the winter wheat that would lie dormant until spring. To Victoria's surprise, Dr. Sullivan paired her with a teenage girl she hadn't worked with before. "This is Emily," Dr. Sullivan explained. 16 years old and our most knowledgeable wheat planter despite her age. Fourth-generation baker turned agricultural historian. She'll teach you proper medieval sowing techniques." Emily, with long braided hair and confidence beyond her years, demonstrated how to cast seeds in an arc that distributed them evenly across the prepared soil. "Medieval farmers couldn't waste seeds through careless sowing," she explained. Each one represented stored energy and future potential. Victoria's first attempts resulted in uneven distribution, but Emily corrected her technique patiently. "Feel the weight shifting through your fingers. It's about rhythm and relationship with the field, not just mechanics." As the morning progressed, Victoria found herself settling into the repetitive motion of sowing. The physical activity, performed alongside dozens of community members working together across the large field, created an unexpected sense of collective purpose unlike anything she'd experienced in corporate environments. "Were medieval fields always communally planted?" Victoria asked Emily during a brief water break. "Depends on the region and period," Emily replied with the confidence of someone discussing her specialty. Open field systems were managed collectively in many European regions. Individual strips within common fields, shared labor for planting and harvest, collective decision-making about crop rotation. Victoria considered this as they returned to work. The opposite of modern industrial agriculture, where decisions are centralized and implementation is mechanized. Different trade-offs, Emily acknowledged. Medieval agriculture was labor-intensive and vulnerable to local conditions, but created resilient communities with distributed knowledge. Industrial agriculture is highly productive, but creates dependence on external inputs and centralized systems. The wisdom coming from someone so young surprised Victoria. "How did you become interested in agricultural history?" Emily smiled, continuing to sow with practiced efficiency. "My family's bakery goes back 4 generations. When industrial flour production started creating health problems for customers, gluten sensitivities, digestive issues, my grandmother began researching historical wheat varieties and traditional growing methods." She gestured toward the field they were sowing. "These landrace wheats contain genetic diversity modern cultivars have lost. They're adapted to grow without synthetic fertilizers or pesticides, and their nutritional profile is completely different from modern dwarf wheat varieties." By midday, when the community broke for a meal brought to the field, Victoria found herself engaged in conversations about agricultural systems that bridged historical methods and contemporary challenges. No longer merely enduring her sentence, she was actively participating in discussions that connected to her professional expertise in unexpected ways. After lunch, Thomas invited Victoria to join him at a small field separate from the main planting area. Experimental plots, he explained, where we compare medieval varieties with their modern counterparts under identical growing conditions. The field was divided into dozens of carefully marked sections, each growing different varieties of wheat, barley, and rye. Thomas showed her a notebook containing meticulous records of growth patterns, disease resistance, yield, and nutritional analysis. This plot grows a modern semi-dwarf wheat variety developed in the 1960s. He indicated a section of uniformly short plants, high-yielding but requires significant nitrogen inputs and pesticide protection. He moved to another section, where taller, more varied wheat plants grew. This is a medieval landrace wheat from the 1300s. Lower yield, but requires no synthetic inputs, contains more micronutrients, and possesses natural disease resistance through genetic diversity. Victoria examined both plots with growing interest. Her work at Blackwood AgTech had focused exclusively on technological enhancements to modern varieties, genetic modifications for herbicide resistance, mechanization adaptations for uniform growth, and digital systems for precision chemical application. The medieval approach emphasized diversity over uniformity, Thomas continued, showing her plots with mixed plantings, hedgerows for beneficial insects, intercropping for natural pest management, variety within species for resilience against disease and climate variation. Victoria's analytical mind began making connections to contemporary challenges in agricultural sustainability. Modern monocropping sacrifices resilience for efficiency, creating systems that require escalating technological intervention to maintain. Thomas nodded. Your father reached a similar conclusion during his time here. It led him to question Blackwood's entire approach to agricultural innovation. As afternoon turned to evening, Victoria remained at the experimental plots, examining data from comparative studies between medieval and modern agricultural approaches. The scientific rigor behind Heritage Field's research surprised her. This wasn't merely historical reenactment, but serious investigation into alternative agricultural systems. When she finally returned to the main farmstead for the evening meal, Victoria found herself seeing the community with new eyes. These weren't people rejecting progress or technology. They were researchers exploring fundamental questions about sustainability and resilience that industrial agriculture had largely abandoned. At dinner, Sarah joined Victoria, bringing a small earthenware cup containing a dark liquid. Mead from last year's honey harvest, she explained, traditional celebration after wheat planting. Victoria sipped the sweet fermented honey wine, its complex flavors unlike anything she'd experienced in expensive restaurants or corporate events. I've been thinking about resilience metrics in agricultural systems, she said, surprising herself with her enthusiasm. How medieval approaches prioritize stability and risk distribution over maximum yield. Sarah smiled. That sounds suspiciously like someone finding intellectual value in this primitive existence. Victoria laughed, a genuine expression that felt unfamiliar after days of resistance and resentment. I still miss indoor plumbing and coffee shops, but I'm beginning to understand what my father might have discovered here. Later that evening, alone in her hut, Victoria removed her journal from the wooden chest beside her bed. Unlike her digital productivity tools, the physical act of writing with ink on paper created a different relationship with her thoughts. She began documenting observations about medieval agricultural systems and their potential applications to contemporary sustainability challenges. For the first time since arriving at Heritage Fields, Victoria found herself thinking not about escape or endurance, but about synthesis. how medieval wisdom might inform technological innovation rather than being replaced by it. The seed blessing that had felt so foreign that morning now seemed like an entry point to a different way of conceptualizing agriculture's fundamental purpose. As she wrote by candlelight, Victoria realized she was no longer merely serving her sentence. She was genuinely engaged in learning something her Stanford education and corporate experience had never taught her: how technological progress might enhance rather than replace the intergenerational wisdom embedded in traditional practices. The second week of Victoria's stay at Heritage Fields marked a noticeable transition. Her body had adapted to the physical demands, developing a functional strength different from her previous gym-sculpted aesthetic. More significantly, her intellectual engagement had shifted from reluctant observation to active participation. Victoria now spent most mornings working with Thomas in the seed library, cataloguing varieties and studying their adaptation histories. Afternoons found her in the experimental plots, meticulously recording comparative data between medieval and modern agricultural approaches. "You've been avoiding the composting area," Jason observed with good-natured teasing as they crossed paths near the central hall. "Too princess-like for the dirty work?" Victoria surprised herself by laughing rather than taking offense. "I've been reassigned based on aptitude. Thomas says I have a gift for systematic organization and comparative analysis." Translation: "You're better with seeds than shovels," Jason replied with a grin. "Fair enough, not everyone needs to excel at every aspect of medieval agriculture." This acceptance of specialized roles within the community was something Victoria had initially missed. Heritage Fields wasn't enforcing uniformity of skills, but rather encouraging people to find their natural strengths within the interconnected agricultural system. On her 12th day, Dr. Sullivan found Victoria in the experimental plots, where she was documenting growth differences between medieval rye varieties and their modern counterparts. "You seem to have found your place," Dr. Sullivan observed, examining Victoria's detailed notes with approval. "Ready for the next phase of your education?" Victoria looked up with genuine curiosity. "There's a curriculum." "Of sorts. Heritage Fields isn't just about recreating historical techniques. It's about understanding the underlying principles and their potential applications to contemporary challenges." Dr. Sullivan led Victoria to a small outbuilding she hadn't entered before. Inside, to Victoria's surprise, was a laboratory, not with medieval equipment but with modern microscopes, soil testing apparatus, and analytical instruments. "Our research facility," Dr. Sullivan explained, "where we analyze what we observe in the fields." Victoria stared at the unexpected technology. "I thought Heritage Fields was strictly medieval." "We practice medieval agriculture," Dr. Sullivan clarified. "But we study it with contemporary tools. The goal isn't historical reenactment for its own sake, but extracting actionable wisdom from traditional practices." The laboratory contained stations for soil analysis, seed genetics, nutritional testing, and microbiology. Dr. Sullivan guided Victoria to a microscope where a soil sample was prepared on a slide. "This is from the medieval three-field rotation system," she explained. "Take a look." Victoria adjusted the microscope and gasped involuntarily. The soil sample teemed with microbial life, bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and other microscopic organisms in a complex, interconnected community. "Now, this one," Dr. Sullivan directed, switching to another slide. The contrast was stark. This soil sample, from conventional industrial farmland, contained significantly less biodiversity, the microbial community noticeably depleted in both quantity and diversity. The medieval approach to soil wasn't based on understanding microbiology, Dr. Sullivan explained, but on observing outcomes. They recognized that certain practices, crop rotation, integrated livestock composting, created what they called living soil that produced healthier crops with fewer pests. Victoria moved between the microscopes, her corporate skepticism giving way to scientific curiosity. Modern agriculture treats soil as a growing medium to which we add specific nutrients and chemicals. This suggests soil is actually a complex ecosystem that can be managed rather than replaced. Exactly, Dr. Sullivan confirmed. Medieval farmers developed systems that maintained soil health through diversity and cycling of nutrients. Modern industrial agriculture has prioritized short-term yield over long-term soil ecosystem function. For the next several hours, Victoria examined comparative soil samples from throughout heritage fields, documenting microbial diversity, organic matter content, and nutrient profiles. Her analytical mind, trained to identify patterns and strategic opportunities, began connecting these observations to challenges facing modern agriculture. The three-field rotation system creates complementary microbial communities, she noted, recording her observations. Legumes support nitrogen-fixing bacteria, grains establish mycorrhizal fungal networks, and the fallow period allows natural regeneration of overall soil biodiversity. Dr. Sullivan watched with evident satisfaction as Victoria immersed herself in the research. Your father made similar connections during his time here. It's what inspired his interest in soil microbiome research. Victoria looked up sharply. Blackwood's Soil Microbiome Initiative, that was based on what he learned here. The concept, yes, though I believe the implementation has diverged from his original insights. That evening, Victoria skipped dinner, too engrossed in soil research to notice hunger. She pored over heritage fields data comparing yields, pest resistance, and nutrient density between crops grown in medieval managed soils versus modern conventional systems. Sarah found her there well after sunset, working by lamplight. "The soil revelation got you too, huh?" she asked, placing a covered dish beside Victoria. "Brought you food since you missed dinner." Victoria accepted the food gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger. This research is remarkable. Medieval agricultural systems were creating complex soil ecosystems that modern farming has disrupted. "That's what hooked me 3 years ago," Sarah confirmed. "My environmental systems modeling completely changed after understanding soil as a self-regulating ecosystem rather than just a substrate." As they talked, Victoria began sketching diagrams connecting medieval practices to soil microbiome functions, then to potential technological applications that could support rather than replace these ecological relationships. Modern precision. Agriculture focuses on efficient delivery of inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, water, Victoria reflected. What if we redirected that technological precision toward supporting soil ecosystem functions instead? Sarah studied Victoria's diagrams with interest. That would require fundamentally rethinking agricultural technology development. Current systems are designed to bypass ecological limitations rather than work within them. Exactly, Victoria exclaimed with growing excitement. We've been developing technology to overcome natural constraints instead of enhancing natural systems. It's a completely different design philosophy. The next morning, Victoria approached Thomas in the seed library, her mind still racing with connections between medieval soil management and potential technological applications. "I need to understand more about medieval crop rotations," she said without preamble, "especially how they integrated livestock and managed field boundaries." Thomas smiled at her enthusiasm. Finally asking the right questions. Medieval agriculture wasn't just crops and fields. It was an integrated system where animals, field crops, orchard trees, and even forest resources all played complementary roles. He led her to a section of the library containing detailed maps of medieval farming villages, showing the intricate layouts of field systems, common grazing lands, woodlots, and waterways. "Look at the structure," Thomas directed. Fields are small and surrounded by hedgerows that provided habitat for beneficial insects and birds. Livestock rotated through fields after harvest, adding manure and breaking pest cycles. Wetlands were maintained for their role in water purification and flood control. Victoria studied the maps with new appreciation. Her corporate training had emphasized efficiency through simplification. Large, uniform fields optimized for mechanized equipment and standardized inputs. These medieval systems embraced complexity as a source of resilience rather than an obstacle to overcome. They were managing ecological relationships rather than just crop production, she observed. The entire landscape functioned as an integrated system, with technological limitations that required working within natural parameters, Thomas added. They couldn't rely on synthetic inputs or fossil fuels, so they developed systems that leveraged natural relationships instead. That afternoon, Victoria convinced Jason to give her a tour of Heritage Field's integrated livestock operations, something she had previously avoided due to the inevitable smells and messes involved. "These sheep rotate through the fields after harvest," Jason explained, as they observed a flock grazing on recently harvested grain stubble. "They consume crop residues, add manure directly to the fields, and help break pest cycles. Multiple benefits from a single practice." Victoria took detailed notes, connecting each practice to its effects on soil, microbiome diversity, and function. Modern agriculture separates livestock from crop production entirely. We've lost these synergistic relationships. That separation created the need for synthetic fertilizers, Jason pointed out. When animals and crops became separate industries, the natural nutrient cycling was broken. By her 14th day at Heritage Fields, Victoria had compiled an extensive analysis comparing medieval agricultural systems with modern industrial approaches. The data consistently showed trade-offs. Medieval systems produced lower peak yields, but maintained soil health and required no external inputs, while modern systems produced higher short-term yields but degraded soil and required escalating chemical interventions. The revelation came late that night as Victoria reviewed soil microbiology data from the different field systems. Medieval crop rotations weren't just avoiding soil depletion. They were actively cultivating specific microbial communities that enhanced crop health through complex ecological relationships. "It's not just what they grew," she whispered to herself, the implications dawning. "It's the order and relationship between crops that created specific soil microbiome patterns." Victoria rushed to the laboratory, re-examining soil samples with this new perspective. The evidence was clear. Medieval three-field rotations created predictable successional patterns in soil microbial communities that supported subsequent crops in ways modern monoculture systems couldn't replicate. This wasn't just historical curiosity. It was a fundamental insight with profound implications for modern agricultural technology. If Blackwood AgTech redirected its technological precision toward managing soil microbiome succession rather than replacing natural functions with chemical inputs, it could potentially revolutionize sustainable agriculture. As dawn broke outside the laboratory windows, Victoria sat surrounded by research notes, her mind racing with possibilities. She had come to Heritage Fields as a reluctant prisoner serving a sentence. Now, halfway through her stay, she had discovered something that might transform not just her understanding of agriculture, but the entire technological approach of the company she would someday lead. Victoria's breakthrough regarding soil microbiome succession had energized her, transforming her experience at Heritage Fields from imposed sentence to intellectual adventure. She spent days refining her understanding, meticulously documenting the patterns of microbial community development across different medieval crop rotation systems. Her growing expertise hadn't gone unnoticed. Dr. Sullivan had begun involving her in research discussions, and even Jason had acknowledged her transition from reluctant participant to engaged community member. The physical demands of medieval life, once so foreign, had become simply the background rhythm of her days. On the morning of her 17th day, Victoria woke to unusual activity in the village. People moved with heightened urgency, carrying supplies between buildings and securing equipment. Thomas found her as she emerged from her hut, confusion evident on her face. "Weather's turning," he explained, gesturing toward the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering. Medieval farmers didn't have satellite forecasting or weather apps. They relied on observation and generational knowledge to predict storms. Victoria followed him to the central hall where Dr. Sullivan was coordinating preparations. The community had mobilized with practiced efficiency, some securing harvested crops, others moving animals to protected areas, still others preparing emergency supplies. "We've been tracking barometric pressure changes and cloud formations," Dr. Sullivan explained, showing Victoria a handwritten log of environmental observations. Medieval weather prediction relied on physical indicators and pattern recognition, rather than computational models. "How severe will it be?" Victoria asked, noting the seriousness with which everyone approached the preparations. "Potentially significant," Dr. Sullivan replied. "Without modern infrastructure, medieval communities were more vulnerable to severe weather. Proper preparation wasn't just convenience, it was survival." Victoria was assigned to help secure the seed library, a task that suited her developed expertise. Working alongside Thomas, she carefully moved the most valuable seed collections to elevated storage areas safe from potential flooding. Medieval seed preservation during weather emergencies followed specific protocols, Thomas explained as they worked. Diversifying storage locations, protecting against moisture, and prioritizing the most irreplaceable genetic lineages. As they secured the precious seed collections, Victoria realized how vulnerable agricultural knowledge had been in medieval times, how easily generations of careful selection and adaptation could be lost through a single catastrophic event. Modern gene banks digitized genetic information, she observed, carefully packing landrace wheat varieties into moisture-resistant containers. But they still require physical seed samples for preservation. Some aspects of agriculture remain fundamentally material rather than digital. By mid-afternoon, the storm arrived with medieval intensity. No weather-sealed buildings or climate control systems to mitigate its impact. Rain drove horizontally across the fields, wind threatened thatched roofs, and small streams rapidly overflowed their banks. The community gathered in the central hall, the most secure building in the village. Victoria found herself huddled with others as the wooden structure creaked under wind pressure. Medieval construction techniques facing a genuine weather test rather than a hypothetical historical scenario. "The experimental plots," she suddenly realized, turning to Sarah, who sat nearby. "The comparative soil study. It's in a low-lying area." Sarah's expression confirmed the concern. Flooding would contaminate the research sites, mixing separate plots and destroying months of comparative data. Without modern communication technology, they couldn't simply check remote sensors or surveillance cameras. Physical presence was the only way to assess conditions and respond appropriately, a fundamental limitation of medieval life that technological solutions had long since overcome. Victoria found Jason across the crowded hall. "The experimental plots need protection," she said without preamble. "Water diversion berms could redirect flooding away from the research sites." Too dangerous, he replied firmly. Medieval storm. Safety protocols prioritized human safety over property protection. We stay together until conditions improve. Victoria felt frustration rise within her. The experimental plots contained irreplaceable research comparing medieval and modern agricultural approaches, data that could transform sustainable farming practices if properly analyzed and applied. This isn't just about historical reenactment, she insisted. Those plots contain valuable scientific data with real-world applications. Dr. Sullivan overheard their exchange and joined them. Medieval communities had to make difficult resource allocation decisions during emergencies. The plots are valuable but not worth risking human safety. Victoria recognized the rational risk assessment but found herself unusually passionate about preserving the research. These weren't just historical curiosities anymore. They represented potential solutions to agricultural challenges she had grappled with in her corporate role. As the storm intensified outside, Victoria's mind raced with potential approaches. Medieval farmers wouldn't have had modern weather monitoring or emergency response capabilities, but they did develop systems for protecting crucial agricultural assets during extreme conditions. Medieval water management systems, she said suddenly, turning to Thomas. Didn't you mention drainage innovations developed during the Little Ice Age? Thomas nodded, intrigued by her train of thought. Diversion channels, retention areas, field berms, all medieval innovations for managing excess water during increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. Victoria quickly sketched a drainage plan for the experimental plots, using her knowledge of the surrounding topography to identify natural water flow patterns and potential diversion routes. The design integrated medieval techniques with the strategic precision of her corporate training. This could work, Jason acknowledged, studying her diagram. But implementation would still require external exposure during hazardous conditions. I'm not suggesting anyone else goes, Victoria clarified. This is my research priority. I'll take responsibility for the attempt. Dr. Sullivan studied Victoria thoughtfully, noting the transformation from the entitled corporate executive who had arrived at Heritage Fields 3 weeks earlier. Medieval communities valued both prudence and courage in appropriate measure. If you're determined, you won't go alone. Jason volunteered to accompany her, along with Sarah, whose environmental systems expertise would prove valuable for water management strategies. They gathered medieval weather gear, waxed wool cloaks and leather coverings that provided surprising effectiveness against the elements. Before departing, Thomas approached Victoria with a small leather pouch. Medieval farmers carried emergency seed samples during weather crises, he explained, insurance against catastrophic loss of genetic lineages. Victoria accepted the pouch with genuine appreciation, understanding now that these seeds represented not just biological material, but centuries of accumulated agricultural knowledge embedded in living form. The journey to the experimental plots, through driving rain and wind, tested Victoria physically in ways her previous 3 weeks had prepared her for. Without modern all-weather gear or vehicular transportation, they navigated muddy terrain and overflowing drainage ditches using only medieval tools and techniques. When they reached the research area, Victoria's fears were confirmed. Water had begun pooling around the experimental plots, threatening to overflow between separated sections and compromise the integrity of comparative soil samples. Without modern pumps or engineered barriers, they implemented Victoria's medieval-inspired drainage plan. Using wooden shovels and basic tools, they excavated diversion channels following natural contours, creating berms to protect the most vulnerable research sections and establishing overflow areas away from critical plots. The physical labor was demanding, especially under storm conditions, but Victoria found herself fully engaged, her body and mind working in synchronous purpose. The medieval approach required direct interaction with environmental forces rather than technological mitigation, creating immediate feedback and adaptation. Medieval farmers experienced weather directly, Sarah observed as they worked to reinforce a critical drainage channel. No abstraction through forecasting models or remote sensing, just immediate sensory engagement with changing conditions. As they completed the defensive measures, Victoria surveyed their work with mud-streaked satisfaction. The implementation wasn't technologically sophisticated, but it was contextually appropriate, working with natural water flow patterns rather than imposing engineered solutions that required external energy inputs. When they returned to the central hall, soaked but successful, Victoria experienced an unexpected sense of accomplishment entirely different from completing corporate acquisitions or optimizing supply chains. This achievement had required direct physical engagement with fundamental natural forces, using historical knowledge adapted to immediate circumstances. That evening, as the community shared a simple meal while the storm continued outside, Victoria found herself center of conversations she would have dismissed as irrelevant just weeks earlier. Discussions about resilient agricultural systems, adaptive management strategies, and the integration of traditional knowledge with contemporary challenges now engaged her completely. "You've changed," Dr. Sullivan observed quietly as they sat near the hall's central hearth. From enduring this experience to embracing it, Victoria considered this assessment thoughtfully. "I still appreciate indoor plumbing and coffee shops," she replied with a smile, "but I've discovered value in what I previously dismissed as primitive or obsolete." The medieval-modern dichotomy is a false choice, Dr. Sullivan suggested. The question isn't which approach is superior, but how historical wisdom might inform technological innovation rather than being replaced by it. As the storm raged outside, the medieval structures built to withstand such conditions through centuries of refined techniques, Victoria considered the implications for Blackwood agricultural technologies. The company her father had built, and she would someday lead, had approached agriculture as a technical challenge to be solved through technological intervention. What if there was another approach, not rejecting technology, but redirecting it toward enhancing natural systems rather than replacing them? Precision agriculture, supporting soil microbiome succession rather than bypassing it. Genetic science preserving and building upon historical adaptations rather than engineering standardized replacements. The storm that had threatened Heritage Field's research had paradoxically crystallized Victoria's understanding of what she had been learning throughout her stay. Medieval agricultural wisdom wasn't merely historical curiosity. It contained foundational insights about sustainable relationships between human food systems and natural processes that contemporary technology had often overlooked in pursuit of short-term productivity. The storm's aftermath brought a new dimension to Victoria's experience at Heritage Fields. The medieval drainage system she had helped implement had successfully protected the experimental plots, preserving valuable research data while demonstrating the effectiveness of historical water management techniques. More significantly, the crisis had solidified her place within the community. No longer the reluctant outsider serving a punishment, Victoria had become an integrated participant with recognized contributions to their shared work. The transformation wasn't lost on those who had witnessed her arrival just 3 weeks earlier. "Only 7 days left," Sarah observed as they inspected the experimental plots, assessing storm damage and collecting soil samples. "Planning your triumphant return to modern civilization," Victoria paused, realizing she hadn't been counting down days as she had during her first week. "Actually, I've been thinking about how to translate what I've learned here into applicable innovations at Blackwood. The statement reflected her evolved perspective. Heritage Fields was no longer a primitive exile to be endured, but a source of valuable insights that could potentially transform her approach to agricultural technology development. Your father had similar realizations, Sarah noted, though I wonder if corporate imperatives allowed him to fully implement his changed understanding. Victoria considered this thoughtfully. Blackwood's soil microbiome initiative makes more sense now. Dad was trying to integrate medieval wisdom about soil health with modern technological capabilities, but something got lost in translation between concept and implementation. The corporate structure tends to fragment integrated understanding into marketable products, Sarah suggested. Medieval agricultural wisdom was holistic by necessity. Soil, plants, animals, weather, and human communities understood as interconnected systems rather than isolated components. That afternoon, Dr. Sullivan invited Victoria to join a planning session in the research laboratory, something that would have seemed incongruous during her early days at Heritage Fields, when she had perceived a strict separation between medieval practices and modern analysis. We're designing next season's research priorities, Dr. Sullivan explained, introducing Victoria to several researchers she hadn't worked with previously. Your perspective on potential technological applications would be valuable. Victoria found herself in a stimulating discussion, bridging historical agricultural practices and contemporary sustainability challenges. The researchers weren't Luddites, rejecting technology, but rather thoughtful scientists, seeking to integrate traditional wisdom with modern capabilities. Medieval three-field rotation created specific soil microbiome succession patterns, Victoria explained, sharing her breakthrough insight. Modern precision technology could potentially support and enhance these natural processes rather than replacing them with chemical interventions. The discussion evolved into a sophisticated exploration of how historical agricultural wisdom might inform technological innovation, not rejecting modern advances, but redirecting them toward enhancing natural systems rather than bypassing them. What you're describing would require fundamental reimagining of agricultural technology development, noted Dr. Williams, a soil microbiologist Victoria hadn't met before. Current systems are designed to maximize yield through standardization and chemical control rather than supporting ecological complexity. Exactly, Victoria agreed with growing enthusiasm. We've been developing technology to override natural limitations instead of working within them. It's a completely different design philosophy. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Sullivan remained behind with Victoria, studying her with thoughtful assessment. You're beginning to see why your father values Heritage Fields beyond his personal transformation here. Victoria nodded, understanding dawning. This isn't just historical reenactment or academic research, it's an incubator for agricultural innovation based on re-examining fundamental assumptions about human relationships with natural systems. Your father hoped you would discover this for yourself, Dr. Sullivan confirmed. Some insights can't be effectively transmitted through explanation. They require direct experience and personal realization. That evening, Victoria sat alone. In her hut, journal open before her as she documented key insights from her Heritage Fields experience. Her notes had evolved from grudging observations to sophisticated analysis, connecting medieval agricultural wisdom to potential technological applications. The contrast with her arrival couldn't have been more dramatic. Victoria had come to Heritage Fields viewing the assignment as punishment, a primitive exile to be endured before returning to her real life. Now, approaching the end of her stay, she found herself cataloguing valuable insights she feared might be lost if not properly documented and developed. A knock at her door revealed Thomas, carrying a small wooden box. Traditional for departing. Community members, he explained, presenting the gift, contains seed samples representing your personal contribution to heritage fields. Inside the box, Victoria found carefully labeled packets of the landrace wheat varieties she had helped catalogue and preserve, along with soil samples from the experimental plots she had helped protect during the storm. These aren't just botanical specimens, Thomas explained. They're living archives of agricultural relationship, genetic adaptations developed through centuries of careful observation and selection. Victoria accepted the gift with genuine appreciation, understanding now that these seeds represented not just biological material, but embodied knowledge about sustainable relationships between human food systems and natural processes. I've been thinking about technological applications, she admitted. How Blackwood might develop systems that support soil microbiome succession patterns rather than disrupting them through chemical interventions. Thomas nodded, unsurprised by her thinking. The challenge isn't technological capability, but paradigm shift. Modern agriculture has approached nature as something to be controlled rather than collaborated with. The following day, Victoria sought out Jason, finding him repairing storm damage to one of the field boundaries, a hedgerow that served multiple ecological functions in the medieval agricultural system. "I'd like to learn more about integrated pest management before I leave," she explained, joining him in the repair work. "Medieval approaches to insect and disease control without chemical interventions." Jason seemed amused by her request. "The entitled princess wants to get her hands dirty with pest management. You really have changed," Victoria laughed, acknowledging the transformation. 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't have voluntarily discussed insect populations. Now I'm fascinated by predator-prey relationships and habitat diversity as natural pest control mechanisms. As they worked, Jason explained how medieval field boundaries created habitat for beneficial insects and birds that naturally controlled pest populations, an ecological approach to pest management that modern monoculture systems had largely abandoned in favor of chemical solutions. "These hedgerows aren't just field dividers," he demonstrated, pointing out various plant species intentionally included. "They're ecological infrastructure, supporting pollinators, housing predatory insects that control pests, preventing soil erosion, and creating microclimate modifications." Victoria took detailed notes, seeing potential applications for technological enhancement of these natural systems. Precision monitoring of beneficial insect populations, targeted habitat support, and integration with other agricultural systems. As her final days at Heritage Fields approached, Victoria divided her time between practical agricultural work and intensive research in the laboratory, attempting to document as much as possible before returning to her corporate role. Sarah found her late one evening, still analyzing soil samples long after most community members had retired for the night. "Planning to revolutionize agricultural technology single-handedly?" she teased gently. Victoria smiled, acknowledging her intensity. "I'm afraid these insights will get lost when I return to quarterly targets and shareholder expectations. The corporate world doesn't easily accommodate paradigm shifts in fundamental assumptions. Your father faced the same challenge," Sarah observed. "Transformative personal understanding doesn't automatically translate to institutional change." The comment prompted Victoria to consider her father's experience more deeply. Robert Blackwood had returned from Heritage Fields with changed perspective, initiating the soil microbiome research program that had seemed disconnected from Blackwood's main technological focus. Had corporate structures and existing development in pathways constrained his ability to fully implement his new understanding? On her 27th day at Heritage Fields, Dr. Sullivan organized a traditional medieval feast, a community celebration before Victoria's departure. The central hall was decorated with harvest symbols, tables laden with foods produced entirely within their agricultural system. Medieval communities marked transitions through shared meals and communal recognition, Dr. Sullivan explained, acknowledging both individual contributions and collective relationships. Victoria found herself unexpectedly moved by the celebration. People she had initially viewed as historical reenactment enthusiasts had become respected colleagues and, in some cases, friends. The primitive exile had transformed into a community of practice that had fundamentally changed her understanding of agriculture, technology, and progress. During the meal, community members shared observations of Victoria's transformation, from her initial resistance to her eventual contributions to their shared work. The stories carried good-natured humor about her early struggles, but genuine appreciation for her evolved engagement. When it came her turn to speak, Victoria found herself uncharacteristically emotional. "I arrived at Heritage Fields viewing this experience as punishment," she acknowledged candidly. "I'm leaving with perspectives that have fundamentally challenged my assumptions about agricultural technology and human relationships with natural systems." She raised her wooden cup in a gesture that would have seemed absurdly theatrical to her former self. "You've taught me that progress isn't always about technological complexity. Sometimes it's about rediscovering fundamental relationships we've overlooked in our pursuit of control and standardization." Later that evening, Victoria found herself on the edge of a field under a clear night sky untainted by artificial light pollution. The stars spread above her in patterns medieval farmers would have known intimately, their movements marking seasonal cycles and agricultural timing without digital calendars or smartphone notifications. Sarah joined her there, the two women sitting in companionable silence before Sarah spoke. "What will you do with what you've learned when you return?" It was the question Victoria had been contemplating with increasing urgency as her departure approached. The insights she had gained at Heritage Fields had profound implications for Blackwood Agricultural Technologies, potentially redirecting the company's entire approach to innovation and product development. "I'm not entirely sure," Victoria admitted. "Translating this understanding into corporate action will be challenging. Established development pathways, quarterly expectations, existing product lines, all oriented toward technological control rather than ecological enhancement. Your father faced the same challenge," Sarah observed. "His soil microbiome initiative was a start, but it remained somewhat isolated from Blackwood's main technological trajectory." Victoria nodded, understanding the dilemma more clearly. The challenge isn't developing new technology, it's changing the fundamental philosophy guiding technological development, shifting from controlling natural systems to enhancing them. As they sat beneath the medieval night sky, Victoria began formulating the approach she would take upon returning to Blackwood Agricultural Technologies. Not just specific product innovations, but a fundamental reorientation of the company's relationship with agricultural systems. The medieval lesson had transformed not just her understanding of farming, but her conception of technological progress itself. True innovation might not lie in increasingly complex interventions, but in sophisticated support for natural systems that had evolved over millennia of agricultural relationship. Dawn broke over Heritage Fields on Victoria's final day, casting golden light across the medieval agricultural landscape she had initially viewed with contempt. Now, after a month of immersion, she saw the intricate systems of relationship and wisdom embedded in what had appeared primitive. Eleanor arrived, precisely on schedule, the sleek company SUV appearing almost alien against the backdrop of timber-framed buildings and hand-tilled fields. Victoria felt an unexpected reluctance as she prepared to depart, gathering her few possessions and the wooden box of seed samples that represented her most valuable souvenir. "You look different," Eleanor observed as Victoria approached, noting not just the physical changes, tanned skin, calloused hands, simpler bearing, but something more fundamental in her expression and posture. "I feel different," Victoria acknowledged, turning for a final look at Heritage Fields. "A month ago, I couldn't wait to escape. Now, I'm concerned about preserving what I've learned when I return." The community gathered to bid her farewell. Thomas, with quiet dignity, Sarah with promises to continue their research collaboration, Jason with good-natured teasing about her transformed capabilities, and Dr. Sullivan with knowing assessment of her completed journey. "Your father will be interested in your perspective," Dr. Sullivan noted as they said goodbye. "Both your personal transformation and your professional insights." Victoria nodded, understanding the dual nature of her experience. "I came to understand much more than medieval agricultural techniques. I discovered a fundamentally different relationship between technology and natural systems." As the SUV pulled away, Victoria watched Heritage Fields recede through the rear window, not with relief at escaping punishment, but with thoughtful integration of what she had experienced. The medieval world hadn't replaced her modern identity, but had transformed her understanding of progress, innovation, and technological purpose. The journey back to contemporary reality provided stark transitional contrasts, from dirt roads to highways, from manual tools to automated systems, from direct engagement with natural processes to technological mediation. Victoria observed these transitions with new awareness of both what had been gained through technological advancement and what had been obscured or lost. When they arrived at Blackwood Estate, Victoria was struck by how differently she perceived the manicured landscape and modernist architecture. What had once represented achievement and progress now seemed partially disconnected, beautiful, but somewhat isolated from the natural systems it depended upon. Inside, modern conveniences welcomed her return: climate control, running water, lighting at the touch of a button. Victoria appreciated these comforts without the entitled expectation that had characterized her departure a month earlier. "Your father would like to see you when you're settled," Eleanor informed her. "He's in his study." Victoria took time to shower and change into modern clothing, the familiar fabrics and styles feeling simultaneously comfortable and strange after a month in medieval garments. She deliberately chose simple attire rather than the power-signaling wardrobe that had previously defined her professional presentation. Robert Blackwood was working at his desk when Victoria entered his study, surrounded by digital displays showing agricultural data from Blackwood's worldwide operations. He looked up, studying his daughter with careful assessment. "Welcome back," he said simply. "I'm interested in your perspective on Heritage Fields." Victoria took a seat across from him, noting how their usual power dynamic had subtly shifted. "I understand now why you went there," she began, "and why you sent me." Robert nodded, waiting for her to continue rather than directing the conversation as he typically would have. "Medieval agricultural systems weren't primitive versions of modern approaches," Victoria explained, organizing her thoughts carefully. "They represented fundamentally different relationships between human food production and natural systems, working within ecological boundaries rather than attempting to overcome them." She outlined her key discoveries: the soil microbiome succession patterns created by medieval crop rotations, the integrated pest management functions of field boundaries, the resilience created through genetic diversity in landrace crop varieties. The most significant insight wasn't about specific techniques, she concluded, but about technological purpose. Medieval farmers developed systems that enhanced natural processes because they couldn't rely on external inputs. Modern agriculture has focused on replacing or controlling those same processes. Robert listened attentively, his expression revealing neither agreement nor skepticism. When Victoria finished, he was silent for several moments before responding. "I had similar realizations during my time there," he acknowledged. It prompted the Soil Microbiome Initiative, attempting to integrate that understanding with our technological capabilities. "But something got lost in implementation," Victoria suggested. "The initiative became isolated from our main technological trajectory rather than redirecting it." Robert's expression confirmed her assessment. Corporate structures resist paradigm shifts. Existing development pathways, quarterly expectations, established product lines all create momentum that's difficult to redirect. "That's the challenge we need to address," Victoria stated with newfound confidence. "Not developing isolated sustainability initiatives alongside our main technological focus, but fundamentally reorienting how we approach agricultural innovation." The conversation continued for hours, father and daughter engaged in the most substantive discussion they'd had in years. Victoria shared detailed observations from heritage fields, while Robert described the institutional challenges he'd encountered attempting to implement his changed understanding. 2 days later, Victoria returned to Blackwood Agricultural Technologies headquarters, the glass and steel structure housing the company's research divisions and executive offices. Employees noted her changed appearance and demeanor, more grounded, less concerned with status signaling, more focused on substantive questions than corporate positioning. Her first action was requesting comprehensive data on the soil microbiome, initiative her father had launched after his heritage fields experience. The research showed promise, but remained separate from Blackwood's main technological development pathways, an isolated sustainability project rather than a core innovation direction. Victoria spent weeks synthesizing her insights from medieval agricultural systems with Blackwood's technological capabilities, developing a comprehensive proposal for redirecting the company's innovation philosophy. The presentation to Blackwood's executive team and board of directors would determine whether her personal transformation could catalyze institutional change. On the morning of the Future Farming Summit, Victoria stood before her closest advisors for a final review of her presentation. The annual event brought together agricultural technology leaders, investors, and policymakers, a perfect forum for introducing Blackwood's redirected approach to innovation. "This goes beyond new products or sustainability initiatives," Victoria explained to her team. "We're proposing fundamental reorientation of agricultural technology development, from controlling natural systems to enhancing them." Her presentation incorporated both medieval wisdom and cutting-edge technology: soil microbiome, succession management using precision monitoring, hedgerow ecology enhancement through targeted intervention, genetic preservation of landrace adaptations, complemented by modern gene editing. Medieval farmers created sophisticated agricultural systems working within natural parameters, she concluded to her team. "We have the technological capability to enhance those same ecological relationships rather than replacing them. That's the true innovation opportunity, not more complex control systems, but more sophisticated support for natural processes." The summit venue filled with agricultural technology executives, investors, and media representatives, the elite of an industry. Victoria had once navigated with entitled confidence and was now challenging at a foundational level. Her father sat in the front row, his expression revealing both pride and concern about the institutional resistance she would face. When Victoria Blackwood took the stage, those who knew her before her Heritage Fields experience immediately noted the transformation. Gone was the polished corporate princess presenting rehearsed talking points. In her place stood someone with authentic authority derived from integrated understanding rather than positional power. She began not with slick marketing materials or impressive technological demonstrations, but by placing a wooden box containing soil and seeds on the podium, physical embodiments of the agricultural relationships she had come to understand. The future of sustainable agriculture lies not in increasingly complex technological control, she stated, her voice steady despite the stakes, but in sophisticated enhancement of natural systems that have evolved through centuries of agricultural relationship. Victoria opened the box, displaying the medieval landrace seeds and soil samples she had brought from Heritage Fields. These aren't primitive artifacts to be improved upon. They're living archives of agricultural wisdom we've overlooked. In our pursuit of standardization and control, the audience of agribusiness executives and investors, people who had built careers on technological control of agricultural systems, shifted uncomfortably as Victoria systematically challenged their fundamental assumptions about progress and innovation. She presented compelling research comparing soil health, pest resilience, and long-term productivity between medieval-inspired systems and conventional industrial approaches. The data showed clear trade-offs: lower peak yields but greater stability, reduced external inputs, and improved ecological health in the integrated systems. Blackwood Agricultural Technologies is redirecting our innovation philosophy, Victoria announced, not abandoning technology, but reorienting it toward enhancing natural systems rather than replacing them. We're calling this approach regenerative technology integration, using precision capabilities to support ecological relationships, rather than bypass them. As Victoria outlined specific applications, microbiome succession management systems, beneficial habitat enhancement technology, adaptive genetics preservation platforms, she noted her father's expression shifting from concern to confidence. The transformation that had begun during his Heritage Fields experience was finally finding institutional expression through his daughter's leadership. When Victoria concluded her presentation, the response wasn't immediate enthusiasm, but thoughtful engagement. Questions about implementation pathways, development timelines, and market potential for these redirected technological approaches. The agricultural technology community hadn't instantly converted to her perspective, but they were seriously considering it, the first step toward broader transformation. In the months that followed, Victoria led Blackwood Agricultural Technologies through complex organizational change, redirecting research priorities, retraining development teams, and establishing new metrics for measuring success beyond short-term yield and quarterly profits. The seed library at Heritage Fields became a key research partner, with Thomas providing guidance on landrace genetics and adaptation patterns that informed Blackwood's technological development. Sarah joined the company's research division, bridging medieval agricultural wisdom and contemporary systems thinking. 1 year after her reluctant arrival at Heritage Fields, Victoria Blackwood stood in a demonstration field where medieval-inspired agricultural systems enhanced by precision technology showed compelling results: healthier soil, reduced external inputs, and impressive resilience against climate variability. The entitled corporate princess, who had once viewed medieval farming with contempt, had transformed not just personally but professionally, redirecting one of the world's largest agricultural technology companies toward innovation that enhanced natural systems rather than attempting to control them. What had begun as punishment had harvested something far more valuable. The medieval farming experiment had revealed not obsolete practices to be improved upon, but fundamental relationships between agriculture and natural systems that technological progress had often obscured in its pursuit of control and standardization. Victoria's discovery wasn't merely technical, but philosophical, redefining progress itself as sophisticated collaboration with natural systems rather than increasingly complex attempts to overcome them. The revolution wasn't just in the soil, but in the relationship between human innovation and the living world that sustains us all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.